Hi, everyone. I am going to be talking about chapters 2 and 3 today. So hopefully this can provide some insight to you as you're going through these different chapters and getting ready for those quizzes and ultimately your midterm exam. So chapter 2 is all about learning about who you are as a learner. And so we're going to talk about learning styles, growth mindset, um, also how your personality might have to, relate to your learning style, and also something called the hidden curriculum. Okay, so this is a little self-test to try to figure out how you are as a learner. So if learning comes easy for you, if you have a preferred style. And then I like this last one. I think teachers are the most significant aspect of my learning. So are you learning on your own or are teachers teaching you? Because as you take different collegiate classes, that's very important. Okay, so at this chapter, like I said before, you're going to learn more about learning practices. You're going to learn more about growth mindset and the hidden curriculum. Okay, so some things to think about, as you're learning about learning, like what actually happens when you learn something? How does your brain change? Do you know what the different types of learning are? And do you approach studying or practicing differently depending on the desired outcome? So an outcome could be, I want to make a good grade, or I want to actually learn. Okay, not always the same thing. Okay, so hopefully you can know about who you are as a learner. There's all sorts of different learning assessments out there. If you're a visual learner, oral learner, there's one called the VARK test, which is, are you a visual, oral, read, write, or kinesthetic learner? It's important to know what type of learner you are so that you know what type of college classes and also what type of professors' teaching styles match with your learning style. Okay, so these are some things that influence how you learn, like your attitude towards learning. Are you open to learning something new, right? Are you doing it just to get a grade? Okay, very different things. What type of learning is involved, like a lab or a lecture class or a synchronous or an asynchronous course? And also what type of learning you like to do the best, like that VARK test that I mentioned before. All right, so there's something that you may understand in college that the type of learning you're going to do is going to be a little more in depth than in high school, perhaps. Or if you think all the way back from elementary school, what you were asked to do then versus in high school got more mature, right? So we're going to look at the bottom of this chart here is that there's different categories of learning that come with your time at an institution or as you mature. It's called Bloom's taxonomy, right? So when you're younger, you probably were asked to do a lot of remembering. Okay, let's take musical ability, this example first. Let's say you started learning how to play the piano. You might first be told, I want you to memorize where middle C is. Where's B? Where's A on a keyboard? You're going to remember. And then it might say, your instructor might say, okay, now I want you to understand the relationship between the notes and how to play, right? That you can kind of, remember that this sound is middle C, right? You're pressing middle C, you can recognize that sound. And then you apply it. Maybe figure out what keys sound good together. Okay? And then you might analyze. You might want to play specific notes that are found in the key of A. Right? And then you evaluate, make critical decisions about what makes up a good melody. Why does it or does it not? And then you might compose your own piece of music. So this learning has become more mature throughout these different steps. Same thing goes with college, right? As you mature through college, hopefully your senior year, you're not just remembering and regurgitating information anymore. You're actually creating new knowledge, maybe even doing something like undergraduate research or an honors undergraduate thesis to actually create something new as a result of everything that you've learned and understood thus far. Okay, that's what we want you to do in college is mature with your learning. So you may or may not be motivated to learn, right? So it's important to start a semester with the right mindset that you're motivated to learn, because that's going to have you open to learning from professors. Okay, so these are some other things to consider. What is resilience and grit? So resilience is basically bouncing back after a failed attempt. So let's say you make an F on a test, the quicker you can get back on the horse again and say, okay, I'm open to learning, the better it's going to be. If you hem and haw and blame, other people for weeks, by the time you're ready to like get engaged in class again, it's going to be too late, right? And grit is the ability to persevere through a struggle that you might have. So it could be you are not a math person. Are you able to have grit and make it through college algebra because it's a requirement for your major, right? And then we're also going to talk about the UGT, or uses and gratification theory, and also talk about negative bias. A lot of times, let's say again, 95% on a test, you're focusing on the 5% you got wrong, not on the 95% you got right. Kind of like when you get when you get a haircut, if 10 people say it looks great and one person says it looks bad, you're going to focus on what that one person said, not what all the other people who had positive things to say, right? So sometimes negative bias takes up space in your life that you shouldn't worry about. So that happens in college all the time, right? You have great, great, great comments and one negative comment, and you worry about that comment. You should be focusing on the stuff you did great. Okay. Grit, Angela Duckworth came up with this tool. And it's, like I said before, the ability to move through a situation that might be difficult. And grit can actually be thought about in GRIT, growth, ability to seek new things, resilience, like we mentioned before, being able to bounce back after a situation, your instinct, your ability to make the right decisions, and tenacity, persisting, committing to, and sticking with, what you need to do in order to be successful. Okay, so hopefully you have good grit and resilience throughout your college career. Okay, so you might say, okay, grit is great, but how do you actually get it? You want to do something that you like, right? Kind of like a major. If you're not going to have great grit if you are doing a major that you just hate, right? So you want to find a good major for you. You want to keep on practicing until you have it under control, and then keep on practicing. Kind of like if you play a sport, and let's say I remember when I was in third grade in gymnastics, I had to get past a certain level. We had these different tests, and I had to do um, a back handspring, and I could not get it. I kept on practicing, practicing, practicing. Finally, when I got it, then it's like, oh my gosh, I actually, persevered, got through it. But then I had to keep on practicing it, right? Because you can't just do it once and be like, okay, I've got it. Same thing in education. You have to be able to keep up those skills, right? Just because you make 100% on one quiz doesn't mean you don't stop studying what you studied for that quiz, because it's going to come up on a final. You're going to have to use it again, right? Find purpose in what you do. That's really important. Try to understand how the course that you're taking relates to your career or future classes, right? Have hope that you can always get better. Tutoring is a great way to instill hope in you, because they're going to help you understand it better. And surround yourself with people who also want to persevere and do well. Because if you surround yourself with slackers, you're going to become a slacker. You probably have heard this term that you want to surround yourself by smarter people, or you're only as strong as your weakest link in your friend group, right? You want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself by people who you aspire to be like, not that you are better than, right? So surround yourself with gritty people. Okay, uses and gratification model. We're going to talk about that. So the uses and gratification model was based on the theory that, or I was trying to dispel a myth that if you are watching media, you're going to do whatever the media tells you, right? So they're like, people are smarter than that. So this theory is telling you that you are probably motivated to learn something, right? You have the ability to think about why you're in college. You're able to think about when a professor tells you something, you can make educated decisions based on what they're talking about. Um, so you want to make sure that you are able to make educated choices of what type of learning environment works best for you, right? So what type of class? Is it a face-to-face class? Is it asynchronous? Is it Zoom-based? And you can probably think about in relationships, you can make good decisions based on what type of relationships work well for you. So you want to make sure that you are constantly thinking about how you can become more successful. All right, talk about negative bias and talking about that 5% of people or 5% you got wrong in a test. So you want to make sure that you can kind of work through that negative. So first thing you want to do is be aware of that negative bias. Focus on the positive, right? Focus on what you did well, and perhaps keep a gratification journal. Okay. Um, Now let's talk about growth mindset. So it looks like I raised my hand on myself. Okay. All right. So growth mindset, and another thing I want you to focus on is how performance goals can help you in learning goals as well. Okay, so performance goals are based on an outcome or fixed mindset, and learning goals are based on a process-based or growth mindset. So a performance goal could be based on I want to get an A versus learning is I want to learn like what chapter 2 is all about, right? Hopefully you're not in college just to get good grades. I want you to think about how you can learn as a result of college too. Okay, so this is an example of some fixed and growth mindsets. So fixed mindsets would be like, I'm not gonna be able to get smarter. Growth is I can continue to learn, develop, and grow. Okay. Um, and so fixed mindset doesn't feel like you can get better by doing something. Growth is like I can always improve. We want you to have a growth mindset in college, right? It's kind of like Debbie Downers have the fixed mindset. And growth is, I can roll with the punches. I can learn. That's what we want you to think about. Okay, now we're going to talk about learning styles a little bit. Okay, so we have visual, oral, kinesthetic. Also, read, write is another one. Visual is when you can learn through pictures, right? So if you can read a textbook, and if you've ever been in the situation where you're reading a textbook and you're taking a test afterwards, and you're like, oh, I know that vocab word was on the right-hand side, it was under the picture of the flower, right? You're probably a visual learner. Or if you doodle and that helps you remember things, you're probably a visual learner, right? Oral is like by listening, right? So if you can listen to a professor give a lecture and recall information that way best, probably oral learner. Kinesthetic, learn by doing a lab. If I know for my son, we had to go over what the scientific method was. And so I did a step-by-step with scientific method for him, where we did hypothesis and what he thought was going to happen when you mix vinegar with baking soda, right? And he learned it after that. He could recall the different steps based on the experiment that we were actually doing. Read, write is another one. It's not in this textbook, but I know it's a term for learners. If you like rewrite your notes or redo note cards for, let's say, flashcards, the act of actually writing it out and you like your hand moving might be a way for you to remember. So that's also kind of kinesthetic too, because you're writing it out. So it's good to know what your learning style preference is and then try to study in a way that matches that, because it's only going to help you if you learn. Okay, so make sure that you're doing what works for you. Now, sometimes students with disabilities, um, have an even stronger sense of what type of learner they are because they've been given assistance with individual education plans and other accommodations throughout their time in K-12. So these are some other things that you can do that students with disabilities have had as accommodations, which is great for all students. Recording class lectures, right? Um, have a text reader to help read a textbook for you. Um, have some assessment accommodations, maybe have someone read a question out to you. Um, physical access accommodations by being in a room with like your own standalone seating, things like that. So hopefully you can learn what kind of learning style works best for you and take advantage of it. All right, next part, we're going to talk about personality types and learning. So many of you maybe taken the Myers-Briggs test before, and it's important to know what your personality type is because it can affect what type of student you are, and also what career might be good for you. And so on page 62, it talks about the Myers-Briggs. There's all sorts of free assessments that you can do online to find out what your Myers-Briggs type is. So basically, you're either an extrovert or an introvert is where you gain your energy from. An intuitive or sensing person, how you arrive at conclusions by your gut or by your senses. Thinking or feeling, how you make decisions. Basically, do you make decisions with your head, which is thinker, or your heart, feeler? And then judging and perceiving how you form opinions, um, and also how you kind of organize your life. Judging people tend to be more organized, perceiving tend to be more fly by the seat of your pants and spontaneous. So you can kind of figure out what type of person you are by those four descriptions. These are all the different combinations that can come about for Myers-Briggs. And each one has a different holistic personality type. So for example, I'm an ESTJ. Um, so for me, you want to make sure that you know what type of personality type you have because that will affect how you deal with relationships, especially if you are a thinker or a feeler, right? So for example, a thinker, let's say you're in a relationship, right? And you're trying to decide whether or not you should end a relationship. A thinker might do a pro-con list about that other significant other to decide whether or not they're going to break up with them, right? A feeler might just go with their heart, right? Or a judger versus perceiver. A judger probably goes to a grocery store with a list so that they don't overspend. A perceiver is like, I'm just going to kind of see what's out there. And then they might overspend a little bit because they don't have a plan. Those are some examples. You've probably heard extrovert versus introvert before. So final word on personality types. Every person is different. There's no right or wrong personality type, but it's important that you know who you are so that you can learn and develop and grow to the best of your ability. Okay, so some ways you can make decisions about your own learning. Um, make practice quizzes. Take a practice, can't hurt. A lot of times you can find practice quizzes in online, Quizlet, or um, even some publishers have practice quizzes. You can also go back to previous quizzes to prepare for a final exam. So you want to manage your time. You want to utilize instructors and professors as learning partners, not just a top-down relationship. And think about how and what I'm learning in this class, how does it relate to my future career? And think about the benefit of what you're learning. Okay. Hidden curriculum. So there is some hidden or what's called invisible curriculum of what you should and shouldn't do in college. So for example, there are some unwritten rules about what you should do. It's an unwritten rule that before you go to class, you should review the chapter that you're going to be talking about. They should be taking notes during class. They don't tell you that, but it's important for you to do that. The teacher's not going to tell you, get out your notebook and take notes. Like in high school, they may. After class, you should be reviewing your notes. If you're not able to attend class, you should be asking a friend in that class for their notes, right? So you should work within the same curriculum so that you can know what's expected of you without someone blatantly tell you this is what's expected of you, to prevent negative results, like getting a professor upset. You should never, ever, 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 ever ask a professor, I'm going to be gone tomorrow. Is there anything important I'm going to miss in class? They hate hearing that because that leads them to think that you don't think that there's a assumption that maybe they're going to say something unimportant, right? Professors don't like to be told that. Okay, so other things with hidden curriculum, think about everything as a learning opportunity. You're in college to learn all sorts of things. Even if you may not enjoy something, it's always a learning opportunity. Um, when you're in different types of classes too, it may be different than what you've learned, what you've done in high school, especially if you're in a really large class. Try to make the best of it. Create your own discussion groups, create your own study groups within a class. That's going to just help you. If you kind of, make lemonade out of lemons. Okay, so these are the four statements we said at the beginning. Hopefully you have thought about that, and especially what type of learning style you have. I want you to think about what that style is so that you can take advantage of different ways you could study that will help you study smarter and not harder. All right, and that is chapter 2. I am going to stop that, and we are going to go on to chapter 3. All right, we're going to talk about managing time and priorities. All right, these are the chapter outline headings that we'll go through. Okay, 4 questions for this chapter. Do you procrastinate on things that don't interest you? Do you use time management strategies? Is it hard to prioritize tasks? And are you happy with how you're managing your time? Okay, so some things I want you to learn is how it can be different to manage your time now versus in high school, why you may procrastinate. I want you to evaluate your own personal time management skills. And we're going to talk about prioritization, goal setting motivation, and how you can better manage your time. All right, so manage your time can really mess up a college career. I know students who slept through finals, failed the final because they didn't make it, failed the class, had to retake that class, push back their graduation, went they didn't manage their time because they were pulling an all-nighter, said, I'm just going to take a 2-hour nap and go to the final, slept through their alarm. Okay. Make good decisions. So we're going to talk about that too. Okay. So if you have 2 extra semesters of college because you don't manage your time and you might have to do some grade forgiveness and things like that, or you withdraw from a course because you maybe you thought you could do more and then just figured out it's too much because you're not managing your time, well, it can cost you $150,000 by the end of your lifetime, okay, by just staying in college 2 extra semesters. So that's a lot of money. So you want to manage your time so you can bank on that 150K, right? That's a really, really nice car or you know a really good down payment on a house. All right, so college time management may be different than high school. So in K-12, your time is like managed by your school. You started school at like 7:20, got out at 2:50 or whatever it is, and you had practice or club meetings. In college, you can pick and choose when you go to class, when you do club stuff, when you go to sporting events, when you go to bed, right? There's no curfew if you're on campus. So you have a lot more freedom now. So it's important now more than ever to manage your time. So you are the person in the driver's seat. Okay, so another big difference is the amount of time it takes to do homework is going to go up exponentially in college. Even though you are in class, only, let's say, 15 hours a week, if you are taking 15 credits versus, you know, 30 hours a week in high school, you're in class half the time, but you're going to have more than double the homework they did in high school usually. So in high school, you probably have a lot of big papers. So your papers in college could be 5 to 7 pages to 15 to 20 pages, right? Probably not something you're used to. Also, it definitely depends on your major, but you are probably going to be writing more. Okay. I love this picture of procrastination of the person in the book stacks in the library trying to do putt-putt because they are just putting things off. So procrastination can be really risky when it becomes chronic. You're doing it all the time. When there are a lot of things to do and you run out of time, so you're just gonna get zeros on things. And when you're trying to avoid something that's really important, right? And it can not just hurt you, but other people too. So several ways that you procrastinate or reasons why you procrastinate. You don't have the energy to, focus on it. You're like, I just can't even think about studying right now. You lack focus and you're like, I can't keep, I'm reading this page. I've read it 4 times now. That means you just need to take a little brain break, come back to it. Or you might procrastinate because you don't want to fail at something you're going to try because you're afraid of what the outcome's going to be, right? So, like, let's say you want to ask someone out on a date. You procrastinate asking them out for a date because you don't want to be rejected, right? Okay. So these are some effects that procrastination can do. You lose time, right? For example, let's say you're watching a new Netflix series. If you've ever watched Netflix and it says, "Are you still there?" You're probably procrastinating on something, right? Because you're just sitting there watching it straight through. Loss of goals, because if you procrastinate, you're probably not up to date on like, oh, I really want to, or you're going to fail at the goals you've set. Your self-esteem is going to go down and you're going to stress yourself out because you are, blowing things off and procrastinating. There's a couple really good videos in the module for module 3, like Eat the Frog First. I love that one, to talk about why it's important to do the thing that's hardest on your to-do list first, because then you're going to be like energized once you do it. It's kind of like when you submit something on campus and you get like that confetti and you're like, I feel good about just submitting that, right? So some ways to avoid procrastination: get organized, know what you have to do, when it's due, how much it's worth, things like that. Put distractions aside, right? Turn your cell phone off, uh, turn your notifications off, just focus on what you need to do. Give yourself a reward. Go get ice cream. Go like buy something new once you make a big goal or finish a big project, and tell someone else. Be like, Mom, if I'm not done with this project tonight, I want you to ride my behind until I get it done and don't let me forget about it. Have someone else hold you accountable. Kind of like when you go to the gym, you're like, I don't really want to go to the gym, but if I go with my buddy, at 7 a.m., they're going to call me until I get out of bed. It's like an accountability partner in studying. So some questions to ponder. How can you use time on task estimates to improve time management? We're going to talk about how much time some tasks in college may take and what help or hinder you when it comes to time management. All of you should have a calendar, right? You should know when you're in class, but also block off when you should be studying for those things. Or if you have, let's say, a literature review paper due in this class, you should be blocking off time of when you're going to work on that literature review paper prior to the due date. Block schedules and keep up with them. I like to tell students, treat college like a full-time job. You should be working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, on classroom assignments and classwork and studying and homework. And then you have those nights and weekends free. But I found that most students kind of, dilly-dally throughout the day and kind of wait until closer to 11:59 when things are due to turn things in. Okay, so it's hard to accurately predict how long a task is going to take. if you don't do things in advance, right? So if you say, oh, it's not due until 11:59, I'm gonna log in at 11:30 and do it, but it's like a 5-page paper, you're like, oh no, right? That can really mess you up. Um, and be knowledgeable that some tasks are dependent upon other things first. So for example, the research check assignment is due before the research summary worksheets, which is due before the literature review paper, which is due before the PowerPoint, right? So it's important to know that some things you have to do in order, okay? So this is an example of how long things may take. Um, so it's important that you predict how much time something's going to take and block the amount of time so that you have enough time not just to do it, but to review your work too. Okay, so 60 minutes a chapter. It's a good rule for how long it should take to study for a quiz. So, but let's say you have a midterm, right? For exam, 90 minutes, depending on the complexity of the material, especially if you've already studied for the quizzes leading up to the exam, right? Because that knowledge should be in your brain still. Okay, here are some apps that can help you if you need some help with time management. Okay, so prioritization is important too, because you have a lot to do, but you should be prioritizing what you do first, second, third. So some steps in prioritization, it could be what is most important, what is due first, um, what is worth the most amount of points. Um, Sometimes what you prioritize, especially if you're in a group project, are not in other people's prioritization schedules as well. So if you probably have been in a group project in high school where you did all the work at the last minute because you had some people who ghosted you in your group. That happens in college too. So it's important that you work with people. Remember when I said in chapter 2, you want to surround yourself by other gritty people? You want to surround yourself in your group projects with other gritty people because they care about their grades too. When priorities conflict, what do you do? Um, you basically have to just make an educated decision for what is, in that situation, the best thing. So for example, let's say your family is a priority and your grades are a priority. And your mom says, I need you to pick me up from the airport, but you have a test to study for. Both are priorities. What do you do? Right? Lots of situations, A, B, and C, that could happen. Be like, Mom, I'll pay for your Uber ride, right? Or, okay, well, let me study for the test the day before so I have enough time to pick up my mom. So there's lots of different ways that you can work through this. And best ways to make sure you complete tasks, I think on Canvas, if you have an assignment, just make sure that's crossed out. That's the best way there. Or create your own to-do list. Okay, so make sure certain that you know what's required for every task that you have so that you know how much time it's going to require. And also make decisions based on importance, priorities, and urgency. This is a great example. It's called President Eisenhower's decision matrix. These are some examples of some urgent and important things. Urgent but not urgent but important, and not urgent and not important. For example, check social medias. Not urgent, not important. That should always be the lowest thing on your list. Okay. So an Amazon sale, like Amazon Prime Day is coming up, that's important, or it's urgent because it has like a deadline, but it's not really important, right? So make decisions based on this. Okay, as I said before, when priorities conflict, try to just figure out what is the best situation that happened, like taking your mom or picking your mom up for the airport and studying. Planning ahead is probably the best way to avoid any problems when priorities conflict. Okay, knowing what you need to do, this is important, especially when I talked about before class, during class, and post class, what you should be doing with the hidden curriculum. It's also important that you are prepared, um, so that when you're in these situations, you are managing your time well too. So for example, pre-class prep is not just enough to prepare for the chapter that you're going to be focusing on that day if you haven't read any of the other previous chapters, right? So for example, let's say you're in American history and you're up to the Civil War, right? But you did not study anything about the Revolutionary War. The Civil War isn't going to make much sense, even if you read the chapter, because you'll be like, I don't understand like all the, the nuances here, because it all started from the American Revolution with, the farmers versus the. So you need to make sure that you are keeping up throughout the entire semester. So just because you do one thing, right? Like taking notes on areas that need clarification, if you don't even understand your own notes, you're not going to be getting very far in that class, and you're going to be a deer in headlights. Okay. The importance of where you do your work is important. The place you should never, ever, 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 ever study is your bed, because your body says, I want to sleep if you're in its bed. I'm sure several of you can, say, I'm just going to take a 20-minute cat nap, and like 2 hours later, you wake up, right? Because your bed is like calling to you. It's like, please sleep. That's what I do on you every, you do on me every night. So do find a place that you are comfortable, but a little uncomfortable, right? So that you aren't falling asleep to study. So you want it to be distraction free. You want to study at the right time, right? So if you are not a morning person, do not study in the morning, because you're not going to retain that knowledge. And like I said, the right space. Okay, goal setting. So we're talking about motivational goals, SMART goals, an action plan, and how to keep to your plan. Okay, so motivation is often the difference between success and failure, right? Because if you say, I'm going to get an A, but you're not motivated to study, you're not going to get an A, right? So you want to set goals that motivate you. So it could be, I want to lose 5 pounds because I want to fit into that pair of pants that I love, right? Or I have this wedding gown I want to wear, and I need to lose some weight so I look good in that. So that will motivate you to lose the weight. So goals have to be SMART, right? It's important that you are very specific in your goals, so you can measure it somehow, so you know whether or not you met it, that you can actually meet the goal and attain it. It's relevant to what you care about, and you have a time limit, right? So, for example, I want to lose weight. It doesn't really work, right? It has to be like, I want to lose 5 pounds by in 1 month, and I'm going to check myself by getting on the scale once a week is relevant because I'm doing this to look good for my wedding dress. And you can do that. If you say, I want to lose 5 pounds in one day, that's not attainable though. Here's some examples of goals, and you can kind of see whether they are a SMART goal or not, right? So I'm going to start by being a nicer person. Like, how do you measure that? Right? So you want to make sure that you are setting goals that you can actually do all those SMART pieces to. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. Very important. So you also want to make sure that while you're in college, that you're trying to be, emulate what other successful people have done. So these are some great strategies on how to be successful in college. Get more responsible. That is great. Reward yourself for completing tasks. Make goals that are good for you. Visualize the result in your mind of what it looks like once you've done it. Break down the goal into manageable tasks. Like if you just say, I'm going to study for my final, your brain is like, oh, that's too much, right? But if you say, I'm going to make note cards on chapter 1, and then I'm going to do a practice test on chapter 2, and then I'm going to do a study group and we're going to focus on chapter 3. That's more manageable, right? Your brain's like a lot happier with you because they can actually feel like they can make those small goals, happen. Remind yourself why you set the goal. Just if you ever are like stuck, you're like, I do not want to go to this class, be like, okay, but going to class means that I'm going to be able to get a good grade in this class, which means I can go on to the second level, which means that that's a prerequisite for law school or whatever it is. You want to make sure you know why you're doing something. All right. Some rules you can go by if you have trouble with time management. Pick 3 things you're going to get done that day, right? At the beginning of the day, say, I want to finish these 3 things, and that makes you feel accomplished. The Pomodoro technique is when you're studying, do some short breaks in between so you get a brain break. Eat the frog, talked about that before. Make big tasks into smaller ones. And look throughout the day for when you are like wasting your time and think about how can I make that time period more, you know, make better use of that time, right? So it could be I'm waiting for class to start and the teacher's 10 minutes late. Instead of just scrolling on Instagram, pull out note cards and flashcards and study. Okay. Or at doctor's offices, instead of just, going on Snapchat, bring a textbook with you, right? Make good use of your time, especially waiting time. So in summary, time management can cost you a lot. It's different than in high school. And so hopefully the time management strategies that you can work on are use technology to your advantage, right? So talk about, having textbooks read to you, Quizlet, things like that, prioritizing your tasks, setting goals, getting motivated, and avoiding the dreaded P word, which is procrastination. So that is it for chapter 3. I will see you next week for chapters 5. And I hope you have a great holiday weekend. See you next time.